Two. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Father's Friday. This is a weekly newsletter and conversation that I hold with members of the Fathering Together community to strategize and talk about how we disconnect from work and reconnect with our families. And each week, I get to speak with amazing people from our Fathering Together network, including Keith Edwards, who we have today. We share some best practices, funny stories, and best of all, our favorite and probably most cringe-worthy dad jokes as well to get our weekend started. So I am delighted to have Keith Edwards with us. I learned of Keith Edwards many years ago as a grad student in higher education and have really had a blast getting to know him these last few years through the Fathering Together Network. Keith empowers transformation towards a better tomorrow through leadership, learning, and equity. He is the author of many things, most recently this book back there, Unmasking Toward Authentic Masculinity, which is based on more than 15 years of award-winning research. He's also co-edited the book Addressing Sexual Violence in Higher Education and co-authored a chapter on comprehensive sexual violence prevention in another book. He co-chaired ACPA's Presidential Task Force on Sexual Violence Prevention in Higher Education, and a lot of other amazing things, including a TED Talk, and most importantly, being a dad with two daughters who he just shared are on 3 different soccer teams. I have 2 daughters who will be on 4 soccer teams next year, so hopefully he has some wisdom to pass on. But thank you, Keith, for being with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Brian. Always love what you're doing and the way you're doing it. And so really glad to be able to connect here and be a part of it. And anybody who has my book in their background, I'm game. Yeah.
And honest truth, I did not reposition too much. It was already on the back shelf because I love to have the books that influence me close at hand and easy reference for people I'm talking to. So
I appreciate that.
let's get into the questions though. So you've done a lot of things as mentioned around sexual violence and higher education work and coaching and things like that. But what brings you back to fatherhood? What makes it so passionate for you?
Well, you mentioned it, 2 daughters, 2 girls, 12 and 14. I just, that will be the most important thing I will do in my lifetime is parent them. I spend a lot of time focusing on my work and scholarship and writing books and doing things. And I'm just very clear that when it comes time for me to move on, there will be a celebration of my life. And very few people will mention that book that's behind you. But they will mention,
I will be there. I will
yeah, but they will mention how I raised my daughters and how I was there for them and the things that I taught them and the kindness that I shared them and the model that I was for them or not. And I just think that I've been to too many funeral and memorial services where the person's professional life was never even mentioned. It was their kindness to the neighbor when their neighbors were unemployed. It was their family commitment. It was their sense of humor. It was the way they asked questions and listened. And to me, that's fatherhood. And I also think that fatherhood extends beyond the biological children you have. I mean, I'm a part of a network of a community, and I get to parent a lot of kids who are not my own, who come in and out of my house regularly in these little moments. And I worry about them and I care for them. And I always think I want my daughter's friends. I want to interact with them so that if anything really went wrong in their families, they'd feel comfortable coming to me if they needed someone.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened, but I just always want to ask. I want to be curious. I want to be comforting. I want to be reassuring in a way that if that ever happened, and I'm a big believer in community and how we don't just leave people to be on their own. Some of us aren't on our best all the time for all sorts of reasons. And when I'm not at my best, I love that people are there for me and for my kids. And I want to be able to do that for others as well. And you never know when that's going to happen, right? It could be a lost kid in an airport that you've never met before, but you just have that dad look and you say, I'll help you. And the kid goes, thank you. Right.
Yeah.
That's to me, fatherhood too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. And part of Fathering Together, we don't dictate who's a dad, right? Whoever identifies as a dad in whatever capacity that is welcome into the space. And I have a neighbor who's great with computers and technology, and I'm not per se, and he's not great with the spirituality kind of stuff and community building stuff. So like we complement each other really well, and our kids know that, and they can tell when they have certain
Yeah.
questions. My daughters just walk over and ask them and
Yeah.
don't even bother with me. So it's great. It's
Yeah.
great that you have that too.
That's
Um,
great.
in your coaching and consulting and all the things you've done, you've interacted with a lot of professional spaces and corporate spaces. Is there a strategy you have observed in others that you've taken on for yourself, or is there a lesson you've tried to instill in the communities where you've stepped into, corporate or otherwise, around this kind of like disconnecting work and maintaining healthy boundaries, healthy
Yeah.
lifestyle? Yeah.
Um, to be honest, I don't think about it like that. I think there's this notion that we need to have work-life balance, and I think that's a false thing because who would position work as equal to life? Life is the only thing that matters, and work is like one of those streams. And so that's how I think about it. I much more think about how do I have work in harmony
Mm-hmm.
with everything else, or integration is how I think about it. And to be honest, that was one of the reasons why I left a full-time salaried role and what started working for myself 9+ years ago, is because I wanted that freedom and flexibility, and I didn't want to be home and then leave and then not be a human and then go. And my workplace was great and awesome people, super supportive, but I really talked about what's the harmony. So I do all my coaching calls on a phone call on a 3-mile loop through my neighborhood. And so I walked 3 miles today and I'll walk 6 miles tomorrow because I had one coaching call today and I'll have two tomorrow. So I've integrated that into my work, not in addition to my work. I also make room I worked out in between meetings this morning and I work from home and things like that. So I've really integrated that in. Um, I also tend to work a little bit later in the day because my kids are off doing things and my partner comes home and goes to karate. So my day doesn't end at 5. I can sort of end it at 7 because that's when everybody kind of comes home and we have dinner and we do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I like that flexibility to not be, I work from 9 to 5. I work from 9 and then to 10:30. And then at 11:15, I do this and then I do that and I keep doing. And I like, spending Sunday mornings thinking about what new models or ideas or thoughts do I want to have for my work. And I don't feel like that's me giving up my Sunday morning. I feel like I'm in a different headspace in that. So for me to think how I integrate that in, you know, I get up and I go to work as a dad first thing in the morning, and I make breakfast and I get them shuttled off and I do those things. And then a friend of mine says we all steal time, right? When we're at work, we're buying that thing from Amazon that we got to get, right? That's stealing time from work. And then you're at home and you're checking your emails, and that's stealing time from home. And um, I have a very different situation and flexibility working for myself, which we often think of me. What's it like to be your own boss?
Mm-hmm.
It's more like, what's it like to be your own employee?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
always say, I have a boss. We have a complicated relationship and we're working on it. So I think for me, I think about that more as integration. I think you pointed to some of the folks that I've worked with. I think the folks who do that, they are clear about what their purpose is in life. They are clear about what really matters. And then they organize a day, a week, a year to align with that. And it's very blurry about the boundaries and things like that. And so I think 9 to 5 is kind of a silly uh, assembly line concept.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the things I shifted when I was working on my own is that how do I do my best work? And sometimes that's going for a walk, that's going for a run. And then a lot of times I'll be frustrated and I'll be like, I just don't know what to do with this project anymore. I'm going to go for a run and I'll think about this on my run. And I get like 20 steps into my run. And I'm like, oh, I should totally, like, it's solved.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, now what? I left the earbuds at home. Now what do I do for the rest of this run? So um, I think physical activity is critical to I used to think about it for my body. I think about physical activity is critical to my emotional well-being and my mental clarity. And I mostly work out for the mental clarity and emotional regulation. And I meditate for the same reasons. It also makes me more productive. That's not why I do it. But I think these well-being and self-care things in and amidst the day and the work and the ideation and the quality of conversations shifts. But I think that really depends on I mean, if you're working on an assembly line, it's a very different thing. Or if you're a
Yeah.
third fish custodian working through the night, that's a very different thing. But how then too would you integrate a life along with that?
Yeah. No, and having a higher ed background like yourself, when we would talk about work-life balance and campus ministry, we talked about it in months and semesters
Yeah.
because, some weeks there was a death, there was a marriage, there,
Right.
any spectrum of disruption, good and bad, that caused extra hours here and there. And
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
I think I love this framing that you're doing of a 9 to 5 is just kind of, yeah, arbitrary in a sense and very assembly line, but yet our world still functions on a grander scale than any one person, right? And so how do we
Yeah.
work as dads to integrate and connect and kind of
Yeah.
find that balance in
And I just talked to so many folks who don't feel like they have the flexibility. And when you really drill down, they do. The
Mhm.
obstacle to that flexibility is them themselves, right? My boss would never let me. And then, well, what has your boss said about that? Well, they said they support whatever. I'm like, well, who's saying you can't do this? Now, there are some institutions, organizations that won't let you do that. But I think a lot of times we get in our own way. And in my coaching realm, that's 90% what I'm doing is how are you getting in your own way and
Yeah,
how can you not be an obstacle
yeah,
um, to where you want to go and how you want to move forward. And I think workplaces have to be more open to how everybody does that.
right.
Dads and everybody else,
Yeah,
because they need good people doing good things and they're losing good people and they're having a hard time finding good people. And so
right,
whatever
right.
strategy they can use to retain, I think is really critical.
Yeah, yeah, and we're seeing that, right? With a lot of companies giving those benefits and flexible hours and shifting
Yeah.
a lot of the priorities that used to be our parents' generation or even our younger versions
Yeah.
of ourselves when we were first
Yeah.
getting into careers.
And
Yeah,
if I'm an integrated dad and feeling connected to my kids and had a few moments extra to care for them and send them off to school, I'm going to be better in the meeting. I'm going to be
right.
better navigating in that conflict with that difficult conversation because I'm not pulled away. So integration, I think, really serves all aspects of our lives.
Yeah, I love it. So we're getting close to time. Before we get to your dad joke, you just talked though about you get in your own way, right? We create these
Yeah.
scripts that other people are going to tell us. Is there a good story that is a life lesson for dads who are maybe listening in of how you got in the way of the relationship you have with your daughters that you had to change? I didn't ask you this ahead of time, so this is like totally on the.
No, I love it. I love being live in the moment. I think one of the ways that I get in the way is I think I overly tend to what might make them maybe feel uncomfortable. Um, and I don't ask them enough. And so I'm at a stage where the 14-year-old doesn't love hugs. She likes these side hugs, which
Sure.
soul crushing for me. But consent's important and she gets to decide that, right?
Right.
And I get to say, I don't love that. And I get that, but right now you get a side hug and that's what you get.
Yeah.
And the 12-year-old is on the cusp of she still loves to snuggle and do that. But I think I'm just paying attention as my girls are at that age about that distance that comes between moms and sons and fathers and daughters, to use a very gender binary kind of way of thinking about it. Um, and I think oftentimes that comes from parents distancing from the kids and the kids being confused about what goes on with that around that puberty time. And so trying to honor their boundaries, respect their privacy, give them space, but also not too much that they feel like I'm distancing, I'm walking away, I'm abandoning them, they've done something wrong. And I think um, as you hear me talk about it, there's a lot of room for overthinking to get in your way, don't you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah, and mine are 10 and 8, right? So like
yeah,
even just the very inklings of the preteen life are
yeah,
seeking into our house. So yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that.
yeah.
It comes down to communication, right? We hear that in work all the time, and it's the same for our
Yeah.
family. So I love that. Okay,
Communication with them and also communication with ourselves. Like, hey,
sure.
I'm reluctant to do that. What's behind that? Is that, what's going on there? I
Yeah.
think that conversation we have with ourselves, if we can clean up the conversation in our heads with ourselves, whoo, that takes care of a lot of mess.
Yes. And sadly, we have to wait till we get to our 40s sometimes to learn those lessons. But
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if we can help some of these younger dads learn it in their 20s, then all the better for all of us, hopefully. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Well, we are close to time. So lay on your best dad joke or cringeworthy, however
Well,
you say it.
I'm not really a dad joke kind of person. I'd rather use the time to talk about my next book. You've got Unmasking behind you. I've already started writing my next book. It's a book about all the things that I should be doing, and it's going to be an ought to biography.
I feel like there's a joke in there and I'm just missing.
Autobiography, ought to biography, all the things you ought to do.
Ah,
Yes.
yes, that is so good. It's above me. I love it. And you even warned me. Dang, this
Yeah.
this is great. Well, for all those who
Well, if
thought it
you've got
before,
as my good friend Paul Essencup, who'd be a great person to have on this, is a humorist, and he says if you have to explain your joke, it's not funny. So,
yes, no, it's not.
but
And
that isn't
I'm
that part of dad
sorry.
jokes too, having to explain it. I mean, I
Oh yeah.
went from dad jokes trying to make my kids laugh to now it's just like the bigger the eye roll, the more I've won.
Oh
Like the
yeah.
more annoying I am, they're like, oh, dad.
Yeah.
And if I can walk them into it and then just crush their souls with it, I just throw my hands up in victory.
Well, you warned me you were a connoisseur, and you clearly have laid the path for all those coming after you. So you have set a
Yeah.
gold standard here
Yeah.
for future Father Friday guests. So
Yeah.
thank you, Keith, for being here to share your wisdom and your humor, if we want to call it that, if we
Yeah.
could be so bold. And thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Father's Friday. We'll be back next week with another fantastic guest, and potentially we'll see if it's a better dad joke. But until then, enjoy your weekend with your families, and we will see you next week. Peace, everyone.
Thanks, Brian.